Here we're looking at the human ear. This is the auricle, not necessary for hearing. You could remove this, and I'm not recommending that you do, but you could remove this and you'd still be able to hear just fine. This does, however, aid in directional sensitivity and gathering sound, which it will then channel to the auditory meatus and down the auditory canal to the tympanic membrane. From the auricle to the tympanum is the outer ear. From the tympanum to the oval window is the middle ear, and then from the oval window inward is the inner ear, just so you understand the boundaries. The tympanic membrane is also known as the eardrum in lay terms, and as that energy wave comes down, it will vibrate the tympanic membrane, which will then transfer that energy to the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. These are the three smallest true bones in your body. The stapes will oscillate in and out of the oval window and transfer that energy wave through now a liquid medium into the cochlear spiral. So this structure right here is your cochlea, and it contains hair cells for auditory reception. The hair cells are capable of interpreting different frequencies, different pitch, between 20 and 20,000 hertz. That's pretty much the human audible range. Below 20 hertz is pretty much inaudible to us, and above 20,000 is also inaudible to us. This right here is the cochlear branch of the vestibular cochlear nerve. That's your eighth cranial nerve. And there are also branches coming from this bulbous area called the vestibule, and this is for equilibrium. In fact, the semicircular canals you see here are arranged in three different planes, and they are able to monitor the movement of your head in any direction. So these are representing the structures, the anatomic structures that give us the ability of dynamic equilibrium, or the equilibrium of motion. Whereas the vestibule is going to monitor the position of our head. So this is more static equilibrium. And I'll look at these with you in a little bit larger scale model, so you'll be able to see it a little easier. Also, this is your eustachian tube, sometimes called the pharyngotympanic tube, because it runs from the tympanic membrane to your nasopharynx, part of your pharyngeal region, and it allows us to equalize the pressure from inside to outside. If you've ever flown in an airline and they pressurize the cabin, you know exactly what I'm speaking about. You'll start to feel pressure on your tympanic membrane. Simply yawning or chewing gum will equalize the pressure and alleviate that sensation that you're feeling. Also, I want you to note that all of this is bone. This is your temporal bone, and this is covered in bone. So these little structures are just that, very tiny. If you look at another model, which I will show you, you have your tympanum, your auditory ossicles, your semicircular canals, your vestibule, your cochlea, and all of that not much larger in total than one phalanx of a finger. Just the distal phalanx of maybe your index finger or even your baby finger. So I just want you to appreciate all of this that provides us the ability of balance, the ability of hearing, is smaller than one phalanx of your finger, and it's completely housed inside the temporal bone. So it's well protected. All right, we'll look at these in more detail. Okay, here's a larger representation of the semicircular canals. And again, they're arranged in three different planes to monitor the movement of our head in any direction. So you have a lateral, an anterior, and a posterior semicircular canal. And again, fluid filled. They have hair cells in this ampulla at the base that when we move our head, those hair cells become stimulated and respond in such a way as to provide our brain with an awareness of how we're moving. And that is what we call dynamic equilibrium, at least in a nutshell. Here you have the vestibule. It has a utricle and a saccule. And again, the vestibule is for static equilibrium, or the equilibrium of position. However, these will monitor accelerative and decelerative forces, again, providing us a form of balance. Here we have the cochlear spiral again, and it's opened up. So you can see the cochlear duct, the vestibular duct, and the tympanic duct. This is too small to really show you the detail, but we'll look at this in another model that's been enlarged. Again, the eighth cranial nerve is the vestibular cochlear nerve. So here's your branch coming from the cochlear spiral, providing us with auditory reception that will transfer neural impulses to the auditory cortex, which we will interpret then as whatever particular sound. And then these two little fibers are representing the branch of the eighth cranial nerve coming from our vestibule and providing us with the ability of balance. Now, if we just turn this a little bit and lift it, you can see right here is the oval window. That's where the stapes, the last of your auditory ossicles, will oscillate in and out, transferring that energy wave to the cochlear spiral to stimulate the hair cells in there so that we can interpret the particular sound. Also, if we turn this a little further, you can see there's a round window right here. This round window is a relief valve. So when we receive a sound of energy, it vibrates the membrane and stimulates the hair cells, and we interpret that sound. However, these channels, these canals in the cochlea are carved into our temporal bone. So if that sound wave were to come down and bounce off the bone, go back up and re-stimulate the hair cells, we would get auditory echoes. The round window prevents that from happening because it releases the energy. It dissipates the energy through there, and so you won't get a re-stimulation of the hair cells. All right, we'll look at this again in another model just to show you a couple of other characteristics. All right, here are all the structures together. You see your tympanic membrane or your eardrum. You see your malleus, your incus, and your stapes. And this is the stapes going into the oval window. I'll turn it a little bit in a moment. Here's your cochlear spiral that contains the hair cells for sound reception and the cochlear branch of the eighth cranial nerve. We turn this just a little bit. Now you can see that stapes going into the oval window where it will oscillate and transfer that energy wave into the fluid medium to stimulate the hair cells of the cochlear spiral. You also see the semicircular canals here and the vestibule right there. You see the branches of the vestibule for the vestibular cochlear nerve. These are the branches that will monitor balance and, again, sound. And then if we turn this a little more, look at from the back side, here's your tympanic membrane, and these are the smallest true bones in your body. In addition, they contain the smallest true synovial joints. Between the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, you have synovial joints. And so when this tympanic membrane vibrates, it'll vibrate the malleus, the incus, the stapes, and it actually is amplifying the sound a bit because it is considerably larger than these three bones. And there again, as small as it is the round window that will dissipate the energy so that you won't get a repeat or re-stimulation of the hair cells. Now let's go back and look at the organ of Corti. We're looking at the organ of Corti. Now this is the actual structure of hearing inside the cochlear spiral. On that little model, we looked at the vestibular duct, the cochlear duct, and the tympanic duct, but they were far too small to see in enough detail. This right here represents your actual organ of Corti. So this is your vestibular membrane, and this here is your basilar membrane. This will move as the wave of sound energy comes through the auditory ossicles, gets vibrated by the tympanum, that stapes will oscillate in and out of the oval window, and now transfer that sound wave of energy through a liquid medium, and each of these is filled with liquid. This is perilymph, and the cochlear duct has endolymph. So as that sound wave comes through, that energy wave, it'll vibrate this vestibular membrane. This is your tectorial membrane. This doesn't really move, but the basilar membrane will move. And as it moves up and down, it will bend these little hair cells right here, mentioned earlier. And as it bounces up and down, they press against that tectorial membrane and they bend. These are the sensory receptors that will then transmit the sound through the cochlear branch of our eighth cranial nerve, the vestibular cochlear nerve. So this is the model we looked at earlier in smaller detail, a smaller size scale, and here it's blown up. So you can see the three ducts and the actual structure for hearing called the organ of Corti. So again, vestibular membrane, tectorial membrane, basilar membrane, and then your auditory hair cells. So that is your cochlear spiral, up close.